Okay, so the difference between Ahmadiyya beliefs and those of mainstream Muslims, as well as Christians, is that Ahmadis believe the second coming of Jesus is symbolic, not literal, and it was fulfilled in the holy personage of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. So this now begs the question that how does Mirza Ghulam Ahmad symbolize the second coming of Jesus Christ, or Isa as he is known in Islamic scriptures? To answer this question, first let's take a look at some foundations of scripture in Islam and Christianity about the use of symbols. Symbols are in fact the language of scripture. In the Holy Quran, chapter 18, verse 55 states, "And surely we have explained in various ways in this Quran for the good of mankind all kinds of similitudes, but of all things man is most contentious." And in the Holy Bible, Matthew chapter 13, verse 10, Jesus is asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" And in Luke chapter 1, verses 13 to 17, we have a direct example of John the Baptist to be the second coming of Elijah, whose literal descent from heaven is still awaited by Jews. The verse reads, "Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard. Thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call him John. He shall go in the spirit and power of Elias," or Elijah. Now we must take note that while the Holy Prophet Muhammad spoke abundantly of the return of Jesus, son of Mary, in the future, he also spoke of events overcoming the Muslims as happened to the Jews. In a famous prophecy, he said, "Surely things will happen to my people as happened earlier to the Israelites. They will come to resemble each other like one shoe in a pair resembles the other, to the extent that if anyone among the Israelites openly committed adultery with his mother, there will be someone who will do this in my community. The Israelites were divided into 72 sects, but my people will be divided into 73 sects. All of them will be in the fire except one." This means that something terrible will happen in the Muslim following, as happened in Jewish history. Let us examine that history. Flavius Josephus, the famous Jewish historian and author of the Antiquities of the Jews, was a contemporary of Jesus. He calls the violent interpretation of scripture by extremist Jewish factions of his time as the fourth philosophy. That's in addition to the known Jewish sects of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. He calls the acts of those who followed the fourth philosophy an aberration of Jewish tradition and a reign of terror. Author Reza Aslan writes in his best-selling book, Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth, "Many Jews in first-century Palestine strove to live a life of zeal, each in his own way, but there were some who, in order to preserve their zealous ideals, were willing to resort to extreme acts of violence if necessary. Members of the fourth philosophy launched a guerrilla war throughout Galilee, plundering homes, setting villages ablaze, and meting out the justice of God upon the Jewish aristocracy and those who continued to pledge their loyalty to Rome. There was a group among the Zealots of Jerusalem that has a remarkable similarity to ISIS today. They were known as the Sicarii, or daggermen, notorious for their chilling brutality and throat-slitting to instill fear and terror. Authors Emerson T. Brooking and P.W. Singer wrote in an Atlantic magazine cover story in 2016, "Terrorism has always been theatrical. Some 2,000 years ago, Jewish zealots known as the Sicarii, or daggermen, stalked Roman-occupied Jerusalem. Rather than killing quietly in alleyways, they made sure to slay Roman sympathizers before a crowd. The aim of these town square assassinations were the same as those of the Islamic State's YouTube beheadings, to send a signal to as large an audience as possible." The critically acclaimed drug war hit movie Sicario opens with the intro. The word Sicario comes from the Zealots of Jerusalem. In Mexico, Sicario means hitman. As the movie portrays, drug cartel hitmen kill in chilling ways to instill fear and terror among their foes and would-be resistors. Discovering this parallel in Jewish and Islamic histories foretold by the Prophet Muhammad, we see that, per scripture, the ideologies of zeal and jihad are not prescriptions for violence, but quite the contrary. The word zealot comes from the Psalms of David, where in chapter 69, verse 9, the Prophet David says, "Zeal for your house," that's God's house, "consumes me." In the very next verse, the Prophet and King David speaks of weeping and fasting as a reproach to God, not violence. Similarly, the term jihad is mentioned several times in the Quran as a reproach to God by means of sacrifice and personal effort, as in chapter 61, verse 12, where it says, "Jihad fi sabilillahi bi amwalikum wa anfusikum," and do jihad in the cause of God with your wealth and your persons. With the inception of Jewish and Islamic histories, both movements faced persecution and mortal enemies. Both movements enjoyed remarkable military success and great empires that advanced civilization. However, over the vicissitudes of time, both civilizations suffered decline and subjugation to foreign powers. Some among Jews and Muslims misinterpreted prophecy to mean the promised Messiah foretold in their scriptures will appear and wage war against their enemies, and took to terrorism and violence against who they deemed as infidels, apostates, and blasphemers. But when Jesus appeared as Messiah to the Israelites, the Roman rulers did not persecute Jews on the basis of religion. Yet the Zealots believed that Israel was under the choke of an idolatrous power because it had failed to cleanse the Holy Land by violence if necessary. When Jesus was confronted with the key question of if fighting Rome was a religious duty, he replied that redemption before God does not require rebellion against Rome. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's. Matthew chapter 22, verse 21. The Prophet Muhammad applied the symbolism of Jesus, son of Mary, for the Messiah in his following. Ahmadi Muslims believe the prophecy was allegorical, relating to Jewish and Islamic histories, and was fulfilled in the person of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Like the Zealots during the times of Jesus, flawed jihadist ideals during the times of Ahmad reflected grievances from the choke of subjugation of mushrik or non-monotheistic rulers such as the British Christians, and called for a jihad to oust them. Yet the British too did not restrict Muslims from practicing their religion. Like Jesus, Ahmad reproached the extremist ideology he wrote in his book British Government and Jihad. Today's Islamic scholars completely misunderstand jihad and misrepresent it to the general public. Clerics who persist in propagating these blood-splattered doctrines are in fact responsible for murders, who know nothing of why Islam was forced to fight battles in its early history. Modern history of extremist violence and ancient history of extremist violence is now open to a rational and coherent view of Prophet Muhammad's prophecy. He foretold a Messiah will appear in his dispensation when terrible events will occur following a parallel to the events of when the Messiah, Jesus, appeared to the Israelites, also known as the second coming of Isa or Jesus.